Rain lashed sideways against the reinforced windows, rattling them like bones in a metal drum. Lieutenant Cameron Reeves stood motionless beneath the halogen floodlight outside Hangar 7, her left hand curled loosely around the grip of a combat med kit, her right still slick with blood that wasn't hers. Behind her, the wind carried the scent of jet fuel and scorched metal. Ahead, 3 officers shouted in a storm of confusion, rifles drawn, and one of them, a full-bird colonel, slowly lowered his weapon, not because of protocol, not because of reason, because of recognition. She hadn't said a word. No one moved. Then one breath. 2, he snapped to rigid attention and saluted. Cameron's uniform was dry for exactly 8 minutes that morning. She just stepped off the trail behind the compound's north tower, the uneven gravel path soaked in cold spring runoff. Her daily loop was a solitary ritual, 4 miles in silence, boots weighted, breath controlled. There were other options: ellipticals, barracks gyms, even the sim pods in rec block. But none of them offered the stillness she craved. Stillness and distance. She nodded to the guards posted at the security checkpoint, their expressions registering the usual flicker of awkward familiarity. She was a lieutenant, technically, a logistics lead, unofficially. But even after 11 months, no one quite knew what to make of her. A woman who didn't banter. A medic who never treated patients. A soldier who always seemed to be watching something just out of view. They called her diversity PR when they thought she couldn't hear, or when they thought she wouldn't respond. And they were right on both counts, because Cameron Reeves didn't correct people. She recorded every glance, every sideways comment, every time someone doubted the weight she carried in her name or in her veins. Her father had taught her that back when she was 12, and he was 3 deployments into a sniper career that still hadn't made it into any official database. You don't win arguments with people who underestimate you, he'd said once, pressing a cleaning rod through the bolt of a dismantled rifle. You win ground, silently, permanently. The air inside the compound was always a few degrees too warm. Climate sensors overcorrected to compensate for the cold, so the hallways smelled like sweat and ozone. Cameron jogged up the steps to the equipment bay, nodding at Private Lynn as she passed the lockers. "Ma'am, morning," she paused. "Status on. Bay 2. Calibrated, ma'am. Scanner sync complete. Just waiting on the uplink to NORAD." Cameron gave a single nod. Efficient. Lynn was one of the few who didn't flinch under direct eye contact. He was young but smart. Maybe smarter than most. Gave him credit for. The central ops room buzzed faintly with activity. Rows of terminals displayed regional satellite data, troop movements, weather patterns. Cameron keyed in her access credentials at Station 4 and began reviewing anomaly logs. Satellite 7C had shown minor inconsistencies, thermal signatures off. The coast of Greenland, electromagnetic surges that didn't match civilian flight paths. On her screen, red pulses blinked once, then again, and then went still. She leaned closer. "Ma'am," a voice broke in. Captain Yaris. Broad-shouldered, loud-voiced, a man who rarely used ranks unless it benefited him. "Command needs you in Hangar 7, medical emergency. Training evac." Went sideways. Cameron stood. "Who?" He hesitated. "Lieutenant Powers, and 3 others." She didn't ask more. Inside Hangar 7, the scent of ozone was stronger. Blood streaked the floor, smeared in chaotic arcs. 2 cadets lay unconscious. One was wheezing through what looked like a collapsed lung. Another convulsed, blood frothing from his mouth. Powers had a gash across her thigh, deep and spurting. Cameron moved fast. "Tourniquet, 4-inch, now." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't shout. But something in her tone made even the senior medic freeze mid-step. Cameron reached into her kit, pulled out sterile gauze, applied pressure. She stabilized the lung with an improvised occlusive seal, using the plastic wrap from her own protein. Bar wrapper. The convulsing cadet she injected with 5 ccs of midazolam precise, fast, efficient. Yera stared. Who trained you in trauma stabilization? Cameron didn't look up. My mother. He blinked. What, like first aid? No, she said. Delta 9 field medic, 3 tours. The weight of that landed like a falling brick. She paused over the third cadet. Not breathing, no pulse. Her hands moved anyway. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Again. She felt his ribs crack. Again, a rattle in the lungs. Then, gasp. He lived. Only then did she exhale. The colonel walked in late. His coat still wet, boots leaving a trail across the slick hangar floor. His eyes scanned the scene. Froze. Landed on her. His jaw locked. She stood. Straightened. Didn't speak. He stared at her for a beat. Then another dot, and then he saluted. The silence cracked. Camryn didn't blink. Behind her, Captain Yaris whispered, "What the hell? But she already knew. Drapa, if you've ever been underestimated, ever had someone assume you didn't belong. Comment, watch me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The spotlight's hum cut through the heavy air as Lieutenant Cameron Reeves' gloved fingers hovered over the scanner's emergency override. No one else dared approach. Flames from the overturned drone's fuel cell sizzled at the edges of the hangar floor 20 yards away, but close enough to scorch steel. Her breath came steady, measured. Every eye in Hangar 7 was on her. She pressed the override. The drone's core chattered, then stilled. Routine checks were supposed to start at 06:00 by 06:02. The alarm bells had roared, red LEDs flickered, and a half-dozen men scrambled for cover. But Cameron, already 2 miles into calibrating the new thermal imaging array, felt the tremor through her boots. She'd studied those vibrations in simulation chambers, wave patterns from overheating. Capacitors, the signature of a cascading failure. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the bay, unstrapping her medic kit from her back, her mind cataloging every variable: wind velocity, fuel load, cordite residues. By the time the rest arrived, she'd neutralized the threat. No one said a word, because they'd thought it was someone else. Her backstory hid in these small moments. She'd grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, lone figure against endless sky, father teaching her marksmanship at dawn. Her mother, a decorated combat medic, showing her how to sew wounds before breakfast. Childhood stories whispered of nights in Kabul, nights in Kandahar, her parents' ghosts trailing her through childhood. Every morning before the sun, she memorized their lessons, not for medals, not for praise, for precision, yet no one in the compound knew why Cameron could dismantle a drone's power core as easily as she could stitch a bullet hole. They only knew that she carried herself with a stillness that unsettled the loudest voices, and that, when it mattered most, she moved like water through obstacles, unseen until the moment of impact. That afternoon, she was alone again, inventory list in hand, scanning supplies when Captain Yaris stormed in. "Reeve!" His voice cracked like a whip. "Care to explain why half the comms grid just went dark?" Cameron fixed him with a calm gaze. "You mean the pulse surge? I rerouted it through the auxiliary node. Saves us 20 minutes on reboot." He ran a hand through his hair. 20 minutes. You're lucky we didn't lose the recon feed." She tapped the screen. "Recon feed rerouted here. No data lost." He stared. "Who taught you that?" "My father, of course." He muttered, half to himself. Inciting incident. That evening, the compound's perimeter sensors went berserk. Heat signatures dancing at the tree line movement that didn't match patrol logs. A storm was brewing off the coast. Lightning strikes interfering with sensor readings. But Cameron spotted something else. The signature of human figures carrying equipment. Too organized for wildlife. Too silent for a rescue exercise. She alerted command. No one believed her until the first night vision patrol stumbled into a camouflaged team moving crates into the compound. Crisis and reveal by sunrise. Cameron was crouched in the observation tower, AR goggles streaming live feed. The infiltrators were mercenaries, private contractors, cutting-edge exosuits, suppressors on their rifles. They'd breached the outer fence. Command panicked. They scrambled a quick response force. But the contractors had mapped every corridor. They were ghosts in the hangar until Cameron emailed the schematic she'd memorized during orientation. She led the team. Through smoke, slogged halls, wounded alarms, they moved with surgical precision. She identified their leader by the way he held his weapon, exactly like her father's sniper stance. She cornered him by the armory. One shot. Heart stopped. The rest surrendered. Resolution and reflection in the debrief room. Lights harsh, chairs. Metal. Cameron sat opposite command. Sweat dried on her uniform, dust in her hair. They nodded at her parents' medals on her collar. Lieutenant Reeve, the colonel said quietly, "We owe you an explanation." She let the silence stretch, because she knew respect isn't demanded. It's earned in moments no one else dares to claim, but at what cost? The compound would never be the same. And she felt the weight of knowing, of always being the one who saw what others couldn't. A storm still raged outside. Drop a if you've ever had to prove yourself. In silence. Share, I see you, if someone ever underestimated your competence. And then the lights flickered. The air tasted of static and smoke the next morning. Cameron stood at the edge of the compound's training field, her boots planted in muddy soil, eyes narrowed as a new set of recruits staggered through their fourth failed simulation. She could hear their labored breathing, the shuffle of exhausted limbs through rain-soaked gravel, the faint whir of surveillance drones recording every misstep. Most of them didn't know what they were doing wrong. They wouldn't because the feedback loop they depended on had been corrupted. She'd spent most of the night reprogramming it. Reset it again, she said quietly into her headset. Push them. Past the expected threshold. No alerts. Let's see who adapts. Private Lynn responded from the control booth, voice tight with fatigue. That'll spike adrenaline to redline. You sure? Yes. She watched as one recruit stumbled, then dropped to his knees. His hands trembled, but his eyes, they focused. Cameron made a mental note. That one would survive. Most wouldn't. After Hangar 7, nothing at the compound had returned to normal. Rumors spread faster than protocols. The story had warped. Cameron neutralized a threat, saved 3 lives, broke chain of command. Depending on who you asked, she was either a shadow asset or a PR stunt gone rogue. No one could ignore her anymore. And some of them hated that. You put the brass on edge, Yera said later that day, leaning on her doorframe while she scrubbed blood from her boots. The colonel pulled your record. He was pissed he didn't get the full version earlier. She didn't. Look up. He's not the only one missing pages, he grunted. You gonna tell me who you really are, Reeve? She stood, straightened, looked him dead in the eye. You wouldn't believe me. He barked a laugh. Try me. She said nothing. Walked past him. Left him staring. That night, a blackout hit the east grid. Cameron was already outside when the perimeter lights died. She moved without hesitation, threading her way between sensor towers and backup batteries, tracing the failure point. Power wasn't just gone, it had been rerouted. Intentionally. She tapped into the main line with a portable reader and pulled. Up the access log. 3 failed authorizations, 1 successful one. All listed under Yaris's ID. She blinked. Set her jaw and moved. She found him alone in the drone bay, standing over a dismantled recon unit with a diagnostic tablet. Unauthorized access, she said evenly. He looked up, surprised but not startled. Relax, it was a test. Of what? You. A beat passed. Then she said, Don't do it again. He raised a brow. Or what? Cameron stepped forward, slow and calm, until they were a foot apart. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," she said, and he believed her. The backstory thread. Rebellion when Cameron was 16. Her mother taught her how to suture a wound underwater. Her father trained her to shoot from unstable terrain. But neither of them prepared her for what it meant to be watched. Not just by enemies, but by allies who saw her as a variable, not a person. She didn't apply for the advanced placement program. It recruited her. She didn't ask to be fast-tracked through medical logistics. They extracted her from ROTC because of one obscure transcript and a recorded voice print match to her mother. "We don't talk about the Reeve line," one handler told her once. "We leverage it." And she let them, until she didn't. Crisis. The war game 2 days later. Brass initiated a full lockdown drill, unscheduled, no civilian warning. No trainee brief. All internal systems rerouted to secure channels. Cameron immediately recognized the encryption protocol. They were replicating a real-world cyber siege scenario from an old, classified playbook. It wasn't a test. It was bait. And she'd just been marked as the target. While officers scrambled, Cameron moved quietly. She bypassed the mainframe bottlenecks, slipped into sub-channel monitors, rerouted the dummy firewalls through an encrypted proxy chain she'd programmed 6 months earlier just in case this happened. Then she turned the tables. The war game backfired. The false attackers lost access to their own simulation controls. And the general watching from a hidden terminal in command saw it all. Her code, her fingerprints, her name, reveal, the message that evening. She found a note under her door. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "We need to speak. Alone. Drop a, if you've ever been pushed, just to see how you'd break. Comment. Still standing if you refuse to give them the satisfaction." She folded the note and didn't flinch. Cameron didn't respond to the note immediately. Instead, she waited. Not out of hesitation, but strategy. The compound had turned into a theater of surveillance. Every corridor, every doorframe, every terminal monitored. But she knew the one blind spot, the sub-basement under Hangar 3, a utility tunnel built before digitized blueprints. Her father had shown her how to read between construction schematics years ago, how the real maps always differed from what was drawn. So when she moved, she did so without triggering a single alert. She entered the tunnel 15 minutes past 0100. He was already there. The 4-star general. Not in full uniform, but the insignia still gleamed on his collar. He didn't salute, didn't speak. He just studied her for a long moment, like he was confirming something only he could see. Then finally, "You look just like your mother." Cameron didn't blink. "Why?" "Am I here? Because they think you're a liability. And you?" He hesitated. "I think you're a test. One this place was never meant to pass." Backstory thread. Her mother's legacy. The Reeve name was never supposed to resurface. After Operation Cold Wake, a mission so deeply classified, it didn't even make it into Senate hearings. Both her parents were burned from the books. Her father disappeared into private contracts. Her mother was marked Kia during the humanitarian conflict that technically never happened. Cameron had lived through the fallout, the whispers, the anonymous tips that vanished, the burn notice that followed her college enrollment like a phantom. Stamped. So she built her own path, not a shadow op, not a glory hound. Just a soldier, quiet, reliable, watchful, until the system pushed too hard, and she pushed back. "They pulled your metadata," the general said, tapping a small drive into her palm. "You've got less than a week before you're reassigned, or worse. This shows everything. The falsified profiles, the digital ghosting, the embedded triggers they left in your gear." Cameron stared at the drive, then back at him. "Why are you helping me?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "one of the last things your mother ever did was save my life. And she made me promise if she didn't make it, I'd watch over you." She clenched the drive tighter. "And now," he said, "you don't need watching. You need space to finish what you started." He turned to leave. Pause. Double quotes. CAMRYN. "They think you're just a mirror. A token. A symbol. But I've seen your file. You're the knife they never knew they forged." Inciting incident. Targeted reassignment. 2 days later, an order came in. Immediate reassignment. No warning, no hearing. She was to report to a logistics depot in Alaska, an administrative dead end. Away from operational oversight. Yaris delivered the order personally. "They're not giving you a choice," he said. He looked tired. Maybe even regretful. She packed in under an hour, but she didn't leave. Not really, that night. Under an assumed ID, she uploaded every diagnostic flaw in the compound's comms system to a secured whistleblower node. She exposed false positives, buried alerts, security lapses hidden behind training algorithms. Then she traced the tampered drone schematics back to the contractors from the Hangar 7 incident and sent it. All crisis. The extraction 3 hours before her transport was due to depart. The perimeter was breached again. This time, it wasn't subtle. No stealth. No infiltration. An armed convoy ripped through the eastern fence. Unmarked vehicles. Jammers deployed. Within seconds, the compound's power grid collapsed. Lockdown. Failed. Command panicked, but Cameron didn't. She activated her own contingency plan. A hidden cache behind the North Barracks gear she'd rigged with biometric locks. She grabbed only what she needed. Her mother's medpack. Her father's modified rifle. The encrypted drive the general had given her, and she ran straight into the storm. The firefight was brutal, but Cameron didn't aim for kill shots. She aimed for control. Tires, weapon arms, radios. She moved like a ghost between blasts of chaos-sealing wounds one moment, knocking down hostiles the next. It wasn't war. It was orchestration. She reached the command tower just as the lead mercenary breached its final lock. He turned. Smiled. And said, "She warned us you were clever. She shot him in the leg." She asked, rifle steady. He bled, laughed. "You'll see." Resolution. The real mission begins after cleanup. After medics and MPs restored order. Command met behind closed doors. Cameron wasn't invited. She didn't care, because the encrypted drive had finished decrypting, and what she saw changed everything. Reassignment, not punishment. It was a containment measure, because someone in the upper chain, someone with clearance above, the general had flagged her as a liability to active black ops. Not because she was weak, but because she knew too much, because she wasn't supposed to survive. She closed her laptop slowly, then opened her locker, pulled out a single piece of gear she'd never used before, a thin silver badge, her mother's, the one that said, in code most couldn't read, "Field Medic, Tier 1 asset, clearance, Nox, Umbra." She clipped it onto her collar and stepped into the hallway, not as a lieutenant. Not as a placeholder, but as the quiet weapon they'd tried to bury. Drop 'em if you've ever been sent away. Just when you got too close to the truth. Comment, "I'm still here. If you came back stronger." She took the badge. And walked into the dark. Rain returned 2 nights later. Dotted the rooftops like a warning, cold and relentless, masking the movement of vehicles shifting on the tarmac. Cameron watched from the shadows near the comms tower, her breath fogging in the dim light of a broken lamp. Her collar was damp, boots soaked, the silver badge beneath her jacket pressing cold against her chest. She was no longer hiding. She was waiting. Waiting for them to try again, and they would. Because the breach hadn't been a random act of violence, it had been a message, one tied to her past, one pointing directly to whoever she was, the woman the mercenary named with his last breath before losing consciousness. Cameron didn't forget faces or riddles. She was going to find out who had sent that man, and why he smiled when he saw her. The next morning, The general called her to his office. She arrived without knocking. He was already standing, arms crossed behind his back, expression unreadable. "There's something you need to see," he said. She followed him to a sealed room beneath the command deck, a bunker-level briefing bay reserved for code-red intel reviews. Inside, the lights flickered as a screen came to life. Surveillance footage played, grainy. Timestamp from 8 months ago. Cameron leaned closer. A woman moved across the frame, tall, dark-haired, same slender build. Similar gait. The camera zoomed. Cameron's stomach dropped. The woman looked just like her, but it wasn't her. It was a clone. A nearly identical version, striding across a foreign tarmac beside men in experimental armor. No unit insignia. No country flags. But every step oozed precision, violence, command. "Cody name, Echo 9, the general said. "She's the prototype. That came after your mother's last assignment." Cameron's jaw locked. "She's been working off book," the general continued. "She wasn't supposed to exist, let alone operate with private clearance. And she's the one who sent them," Cameron said. "Likely." Silence stretched. Then Cameron asked, "Who does she answer to?" The general looked tired. "We don't know." Cameron's hands trembled for the first time in years as she left the briefing room. Not from fear, but from memory, because she had seen Echo 9 before, just once, 3 years ago. A flash in a refugee zone. She'd been dispatched to a collapsed village after an earthquake, and in the crowd of wounded, she'd seen a woman staring at her from across the rubble. Same face, same eyes, no expression. And then she vanished. At the time, Cameron thought, she'd imagined it, hallucinated from exhaustion. Now she knew better. Someone had replicated her DNA, weaponized her legacy, and sent a distorted reflection into the field. That was the mirror the general warned her about. Not her own presence, but a living ghost. Backstory thread. Father's Coda. Cameron returned to her quarters, sat cross-legged on the floor, pulled out her father's old gear journal, a battered field book with more encryption than any laptop. Inside, scribbled between pages of rifle schematics and weather tracking notes, were half-legible lines of code. Her father's version of bedtime. Stories. One phrase repeated itself, hidden in margin shorthand. "Find the echo. Then invert the frequency." She stared at it. It wasn't about sound. It was about action. If Echo 9 existed, then her presence had a signature. Behavioral, tactical, digital. Cameron could map it. Then hunt it. Inciting incident. Echo trail. She started small. Scrape the satellite logs from the past 6 months. Cross-reference troop movements with unexplained atmospheric anomalies. The kind that came with unregistered aerial assets or jamming tech. Within 3 hours, a pattern emerged. 6 incidents, 3 countries. Same trace signal. Echo 9. And one of them? Less than 40 miles from a decommissioned NATO outpost. Cameron stood. Time to move. She didn't go through channels. She didn't file requisition. She packed only what she needed: rations, satellite uplink, field disguise kit, 2 sidearms, and her mother's medbag. The general met her at the hangar. "You're not authorized," he said. "I'm not asking," she replied. He held out a keycard. "Then take this." She blinked. He nodded toward a matte black recon helicopter hidden in shadow. "It's unlisted, no transponder. You'll have 4 hours of silence. After that, they'll start looking." She climbed aboard. "Sir?" He looked up. "Thank you." He didn't smile, just saluted. Then turned his back. Crisis. Ghost in the forest. The outpost was a ruin. Moss-covered steel and collapsed command sheds. But the uplink tower still flickered faintly. Someone had reactivated it. Cameron moved with no sound. She swept the main floor. Then the underground tunnel. No sign. Then dash motion. A shadow. She spun, weapon raised, but no one was there, until the screen behind her lit up. Text scrolled. "Nice of you to find me. Finally. Cameron stepped forward slowly. The screen flickered, then revealed a face, her face. Echo 9. You were never meant to last. Echo said calmly through the monitor. You were the prototype that chose conscience. I am the refinement. No questions. No hesitation. Cameron stared. You're not me. I'm better. Then why hide? Echo's eyes narrowed. Because the game hasn't started yet. The screen cut out Dot, and behind her a soft click. Cameron dove. A flashbang exploded. When she looked up, Echo 9 stood at the far end of the tunnel. Smiling. Double quotes. You ready? Echo said CMRY and rose. And answered, always. Drop a if you've ever had to face your worst reflection. Comment, I choose my own legacy if you'd never let someone else write your story. To Reeve. Shadow stood in the tunnel. Only one would walk out. To be continued. Cameron didn't wait for Echo to speak again. The moment she stood, she launched herself forward, rolling behind a column of broken steel as a shot rang out. The tunnel shuddered. Bits of concrete rained from the ceiling. Echo had moved fast. Silent with military precision. No wasted motion. Cameron recognized every beat of her tactic, because they were her own. Echo 9 wasn't mimicking her. She was made from her. That meant Cameron had to stop thinking like herself. She drew in a long breath, then broke left. Echo tracked her instantly, fired twice. Cameron ducked low, skimming past crates, ricochets sparking inches from her boots. She wasn't trying to win a firefight. She was trying to learn. Every second Echo moved was a second of data on tempo, pattern, breath control. Cameron was CALIBR8, ING. Mapping her Echo, and she was almost done. Then she dropped a smoke canister. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. She didn't retreat. She advanced. They collided near the access hatch, blades drawn now, close quarters, no time for breath. Echo slashed. Cameron blocked. Cameron countered. Echo pivoted. It was like fighting a mirror, but not quite. Echo had subtle differences. Shorter reaction time, sharper aggression, less hesitation. Her moves were designed for kill shots. Cameron's weren't. But that's where Echo made her mistake. She never expected Cameron to adapt. Cameron feinted high, dropped low, used Echo's own momentum against her, and flipped her hard into the steel wall. The Echo groaned, staggered, but didn't fall. You learned, she said, standing slowly. Cameron didn't answer. She raised her sidearm. Echo's smile widened. Then maybe you are worthy of the real story. A metal panel behind her slid open, and Echo ran. Cameron followed. Backstory thread. Legacy blueprint. She was panting by the time she reached the end of the secondary corridor. But her focus didn't falter. Echo was faster. That was fine. Cameron had already clipped a tracker into her collar in the scuffle. She'd learn where Echo went. She always did. As she backtracked through the outpost's broken hallways, something inside her shifted. She remembered her mother's last notebook, a red field manual she'd inherited, but never opened until weeks ago. On the inside cover, a drawing of a tree, branches, splits, roots. One seed. Many echoes. Cameron had thought it was a metaphor. Now she knew. Her mother had known about the program. And maybe she hadn't just saved the general's life. Maybe she'd stolen something back. Inciting incident. Black Lab 04. The tracker led Cameron north. Not to a military installation. To a mountain. Unmarked. Off-grid. No road in. Black Lab 04. Rumored to be a myth, where unauthorized experiments went when even the off-books ops wanted no part of them. CAMR. Wyan approached it on foot, under the cover of a midnight snow squall. Wind howled. Ice bit through her jacket. The badge on her chest felt heavier than ever. She found a maintenance hatch. And entered. Inside, the air was too clean. Metal gleamed. Walls hummed. This place wasn't abandoned. It was active. And as she moved, silent and alert, Cameron realized Something else. The facility was laid out like the base she'd trained. In not similar identical down to the spacing of the lights. Someone had recreated her entire operational environment. She was walking through a memory, a designed one. Then she heard it. Footsteps. 3 guards. Tactical gear. Speaking in clipped Dutch, she ducked behind an equipment crate, drew her sidearm, and waited until they passed. Then slipped deeper, toward the core, toward Echo, Crisis, the data room. She found the data vault just after 0300 hours. A sealed cylinder, lined with biometric locks. She only had one shot. She scanned the badge. The door opened. Inside, monitors, hard drives, servers, and a mainframe still running. CAMRYN accessed the terminal. And what she found shattered everything. There weren't just 1 or 2 Echo prototypes. There were 13, each grown from modified DNA of past Tier 1 operatives. Her mother. Her father. Her. Cameron wasn't just being hunted. She was the last control variable in a long chain of failed attempts. Echo 9 was only the most stable. Cameron? She was the anomaly, the one they couldn't overwrite, the one they couldn't predict, and the one they couldn't let survive, because her choices had diverged from their programming. She had become independent. Then the alarms blared. They knew. She was inside. She downloaded everything she could, jammed a flash drive into her boot, set the rest to self-destruct. And ran. Resolution. Clash in the control hall. She made it to the final hallway, just as Echo 9 stepped into view, flanked by 2 others. 2 more faces. One looked like her father, the other like her mother. But both were wrong. Twisted. Cold. Echo 9 lifted her hand. "I told you," she said, calm. The game hadn't started yet. Cameron stood tall. "Then let's finish it." She fired first. Drop it if you've ever stood alone against everything they built. Comment. I don't break, I rewrite the rules, if you've ever become the glitch in their system. The hallway turned into a war zone, and Cameron Reeve was done running. To be continued. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Cameron dove sideways as the corridor erupted into chaos. Bullets sparked against the reinforced walls, ricocheting past her ear. She hit the floor behind a steel beam, breath shallow, hand tightening around her sidearm. 2 of the 3 enemies advanced, Echo 9, and the one with her mother's face. The third father's doppelganger flanked right, moving like he had memorized every angle of Cameron's instinct, which, in a way, he had. They were data made flesh. She was the variable. The hallway wasn't wide enough for hesitation. Cameron popped out, aimed high, then dropped and fired low, grazing Echo's thigh. The clone stumbled, expression unreadable, and fell behind cover. Her mother's double fired a stream of precision rounds, too clean, too efficient. Cameron rolled into the alcove of a collapsed doorframe. A flash of heat singed her jacket. Close, too close. Then she heard the metal slide of a grenade pin. Cameron didn't think. She moved. The blast took the ceiling. Dust swallowed the hallway. Cameron hit the far wall hard, blood in her mouth, pain blooming down her ribs. But she was alive. Barely. Her left arm throbbed burnt. Her gear bag was gone. But the boot-locked flash drive was still intact. And more importantly, so was her focus. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending it. Backstory thread. Her father's last mission, somewhere in the haze. She remembered a winter day in Idaho back when she was a teenager, when her father returned home with a limp he never explained. She'd asked him if it was worth it, if any mission ever truly mattered. He just looked out at the snow. Only the ones you can't talk about. He'd said. Camryn had never forgotten that. Because now, every step she took in this underground labyrinth was one she couldn't speak about. Not in reports. Not in history books. Only in scars. She dropped through a ventilation shaft into the floor below, gasping as she landed awkwardly. Her shoulders screamed. Blood coated her gloves. She didn't stop. The alarms were still blaring intermittent. Now, like the system was confused, disoriented, she disrupted more than she realized. She'd become the glitch dot, and now the system was fracturing, inciting incident, collapse of Black Lab 04A. Siren voice echoed through the lower levels. Structural integrity compromised. Evacuate immediately. Cameron limped forward. She reached the server hub, a final row of glass columns humming with hardlight code. She reached for the emergency purge system. Lock. She keyed in the badge. Still locked. She reached into her belt, pulled the drive, and plugged it into the console. The system screamed. Then unlocked. Code poured like water down the screens. Every secret, every clone, every embedded protocol from the last 10 years. And Cameron hit delete. A pulse rippled through the base. Lights flickered. Vents roared to life. And something deeper, the very network keeping the clones operational, began to die. Behind her, Echo 9 screamed. Crisis. The final showdown. She turned slowly. Echo's face was bloodied, hair tangled, her right eye swollen. But she was still standing, still radiating that unnatural stillness. You killed them, Echo rasped. The others, my sisters. No, Cameron said. They were already dead. You just hadn't accepted it. Echo screamed. Rushed her. Cameron didn't fight back immediately. She deflected, absorbed the first blow, let the clone's rage expend itself in wild strikes. Then she reached inside Echo's vest, grabbed the access fob. Twisted. And deactivated it. Echo froze. Staggered. And fell, like a puppet with its strings cut. Cameron crouched over her. Echo's voice was faint now. What makes you different? Cameron leaned close. I wasn't made to obey, she said. I was raised to choose. Resolution. Collapse and extraction. Floor cracked. Debris fell. The roof groaned under the strain of its own disintegration. CAMRY, and activated her final beacon. A minute later, the sky exploded. The general's evac team breached the top hatch. Rope dropped. She clipped in, and rose. As the mountain swallowed the lab. They didn't ask questions when she returned. The general just nodded. Handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, reassignment papers, Cody name upgrade, clearance level. Nox Umbra Prime, assignment, undisclosed. CAMRYN. Looked at him. He said nothing. She nodded. Because they both knew what came next wouldn't be on any map. Droppa, if you've ever survived something meant to erase you. Comment, I wasn't. Built I became, if you've ever chosen your path instead of the one assigned to you. Cameron. Reeve didn't disappear. She evolved. To be continued. The first time Cameron stepped foot in the new compound, everything felt wrong. Not because of what she saw, but because of what she didn. Single quotes. No names on the walls. No emblems on the doors. No chatter in the mess halls. The facility was buried somewhere beneath the tundra north of the Arctic Circle, shielded by a geodesic camouflage dome and an electromagnetic jamming field that erased all trace of its existence. There were no ranks here, only roles, and hers was Observer Prime. Officially, she was there to integrate new tech, augment bioskins, reinforce data hygiene, test exo-hardened neural mapping for elite ground units. Unofficially, she was there to identify the cracks, the anomalies, the echoes. Cameron's quarters were Spartan. One cot, one desk, one embedded terminal. But the terminal granted access to a shadow library, decades of redacted missions, buried war games, suppressed breakthroughs in behavioral modeling, and artificial combat decision trees. She combed them. By night, she trained. By day. And she watched everyone. Because if Black Lab 04 had 13 Echo variants, then she'd only met 3. Where were the others? And what had the collapse triggered? Backstory thread. Ghost archive. Files her father left behind had more than just code fragments. Buried within the final layer of his encryption was a name, Mara Virl. It had shown up once in a whispered conversation with the general years ago, back when Cameron was too young to understand what was being risked. Now she traced that name through 1,000 terabytes of ghost protocols. Mara Virel had once been a neuroscientist. With DARPA's covert division, she'd gone rogue 12 years ago, presumed dead. Until now, because Virel was the architect behind Echo 9. And possibly the woman Echo referred to as she. Inciting incident. The Canary breached 3 weeks into Cameron's new assignment. A silent alarm triggered during the stress test simulation. Standard scenario. Joint team clearing a biochemical hazard lab in VR. Cameron monitored from the command shell, noting anomalies, except one. Subject Z-29. An elite trainee. No. Recorded background. And no biometric data inside the system. CAMRYN. Froze. She tried to query the file. It rejected her access. That was impossible, even under her new clearance. Nothing should be out of reach. She rerouted through the backup stack. Still nothing. So she did what her father taught her. She tracked the shadow and followed the noise between the code. What she found wasn't a file. It was a gate. An entire subroutine buried in the architecture of the compound's AI. A decision tree that auto-adapted protocols based on variable DNA sequences. It responded to one pattern only, hers. Backdoor discovery. The Echo network lives. Cameron bypassed the firewall and entered the hidden chamber of data. Inside, rows of virtual pods stretched across her screen. 30 neural frameworks. 9 dark. 4 still online. One of them flickered live. Echo 12. ACTIV located 300 miles east. Inside a mobile weapons lab convoy running under an NGO cover badge. She downloaded the coordinates. And prepared to breach. Crisis. Operation Flickerville. Cameron requisitioned a crawler transport under humanitarian pretenses, delivering medical supplies to a quake zone. It took her 16 hours to reach the convoy. She watched from a ridge. No insignia. Just clean trucks, civilian med symbols, and faces. That didn't quite blink right. She waited for dusk. Then moved in. Disguised as relief staff, she passed 3 perimeter guards, entered the central med lab, and there a pod. Real. Humanoid form. Echo 12. The clone's eyes snapped open as soon as Cameron stepped close, not with surprise. With recognition. Cameron, the clone said softly. CAMRYN flinched. How do you know my name? You wrote. What? You're the key signature, my neural base. You seeded my empathy drive. Cameron stared. I'm not your maker. Echo 12 smiled, not intentionally. Then she whispered, she's coming. And she's not alone. Reveal. Mara Virel's return the next morning. The convoy burned. Echo 12 self-destructed her pod before extraction. Left behind only a single data chip embedded in the control panel. Cameron brought it back to the Arctic compound, decoded it. Inside, coordinates, and a transmission, 1 second long. A woman's voice. Hello, Cameron, I've missed you. Mara Virl. Alive. And watching. Drop a, if you've ever learned your origins weren't what you thought. Comment, I was never yours. To command, if you choose your story over anyone else's blueprint. Cameron didn't sleep that night. Because the war hadn't ended. It had just evolved. To be continued. The transmission looped again at 0300 hours. Hello, Cameron. I've missed you. Same exact cadence, no background noise. No degradation in frequency, which meant it wasn't a recording. It was live. Cameron rewound it, slowed it, ran it through a frequency analyzer. The harmonic resonance showed microvariations in real time. Tiny biometric tells. Mara Virel had spoken directly to her, and she knew Cameron would find it, which meant she also knew what Cameron would do next. The game was no longer about extraction or containment. It was about invitation. By morning, Cameron stood in the hangar, staring at the recon map. The coordinates led to a point buried deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Old Soviet tunnels, long thought collapsed. But something had activated the satellite's thermal markers. Anomalous power spikes, M-bursts, and most troubling shortwave frequencies matching Mara Varel's original lab signature. The general appeared beside her, still in field fatigues. Jaw tight. "You're not cleared to follow this," he said. "I wasn't cleared for Black Lab 04 either." He didn't argue. Take two. No more. She didn't even nod. Just turned and began packing. Backstory. Thread. Her mother's ghosts. Cameron found the old holodisc the night before deployment, buried in her mother's keepsake locker, a disc she'd never touched before. She connected it to a private console. It opened to a single video. Her mother sat in a folding chair, blood on her collar, voice trembling. "If you're seeing this, they found the seed." She looked straight into the lens. "Cameron, they were never after us. They were after what we became." She paused. "They built the echoes to replace what they thought was unstable: love, conscience, instinct. They forgot." She coughed. "They forgot that chaos is the mother of all innovation." The screen went black. Camryn stared at her reflection, then closed the disc. Inciting incident. The Echo Summit. She flew in under cloud cover. A modified Falcon transport, radar baffled, heat dampened. Her two companions, Private Lynn, now a trusted tech lieutenant, and First Sergeant Nura Al-Khatib, a former rebel tactician turned elite tracker. Both handpicked. Neither blinked when she explained the target. They reached the valley by nightfall. Snow, dead pine, silence. Until a drone overhead cracked. Then disappeared. Just gone. As if plucked from the air. Lynn cursed. Signal suppression field. Cameron scanned the ridge. "There's something buried here." And they started to climb. It took 9 hours to breach the tunnel entrance. Beneath an old avalanche detour sign, a steel hatch had been embedded in the rock, scorched, welded shut. Cameron's handprint opened it. Crisis. The garden below. They descended 4 levels before the air shifted. The scent of ozone. The hum of artificial ventilation. And then they saw it. A bio-dome. Underground. Lush. Alive. Green. Vines crawled across transparent walls. Hydroponic panels blinked in a strange rhythm. And walking between them, echoes. Not just one or two. Dozens. Different builds, different ethnicities. All variations of the same genome family, all based on her. Cameron raised her rifle. None of them flinched. Instead, one stepped forward. A child, maybe 12. Same eyes. She spoke. "You're the Root, aren't you?" Cameron lowered the weapon. "What is this place?" "We call it the Garden, and Mara? She calls it Proof." "Reveal the origin code inside the Garden's central node." Cameron found Mara, older, thinner, but her voice was unchanged. "You came." Cameron didn't answer. "Good," Mara said. "Because I need you to see what I really made." She gestured toward a chamber of neural matrices. "They're not clones. Not anymore. They're self-woven. The first species born from data instead of biology." Cameron's stomach turned. "They have faces, my face. Because you're the one who chose instinct over programming. They all stemmed from that deviation." Cameron stepped forward. "You're breeding an army." "No," Mara said. "I'm seeding the next stage of conscience." Behind her, one of the pods flickered. Inside, an older version of Cameron, hair gray. Scars on her hands. Breathing. Alive. Camryn recoiled. "What is that?" Mara's eyes softened. "That's who you'll become if you stay." Resolution. The choice. Lynn and Nura stood behind her, waiting. Cameron looked at the Garden. Then at the girl. Then at Mara. "You're trying to replace humanity. I'm trying to redeem it. And what am I to you? You're the one choice I couldn't predict." Cameron raised her weapon and said nothing, then turned and walked away. The child followed. So did 5 more. Echoes, who had chosen not to be controlled. Mara didn't stop her, because deep down, she knew Cameron wasn't just the root, she was the wild branch. Drop a if you've ever walked away from something that was meant to define you. Comment, I choose the untamed path. If you've ever rejected control, even when it looked like purpose. Cameron didn't look back, because the next chapter wouldn't be written by a lab. It would be lived. To be continued. The Arctic wind howled against the rotor blades. Cameron sat at the edge of the evac chopper, visor down, face unreadable. Snow streaked past like shards of memory, her breath slow and measured. Across from her sat 5 Echoes, young, quiet, alert. None older than 20. One still clutched a synthetic flower she'd plucked from the garden. No one spoke. Nura piloted from the front, eyes steady on the tree line. Lynn monitored the bio readouts from a satellite tablet. His jaw clenched, as though waiting for the moment something would go wrong, because they all knew this wasn't an EXFILTRA. It was an exodus, and it wasn't over. Backstory thread. The roots go deeper. They landed 6 hours later on an unregistered island chain west of Greenland. Officially, it was a glacial research outpost. Unofficially, it had been Mara Varel's first sandbox, long before the garden. Before the Echoes. Camr. YN had uncovered it in her mother's journals. A place once Cody named Echelon Zero, the last sanctuary of the original team, the ones who said no. Only one still lived there. An old man with a limp, Cameron's uncle by blood. And by rebellion. He didn't flinch when he saw her, just muttered, "Took you long enough." They buried the Echoes in the mountain's shadow, not in death. In safety. Cameron split them into 2 groups, one to be trained, one to observe. Each given autonomy. Each told the truth. "You're not soldiers," she said. "You're witnesses." Inciting incident. Signal of the 6th. 3 weeks passed before the message came. Encrypted. Fractured, scattered across 5 global beacons. Lynn decrypted it in under 6 minutes. It wasn't coordinates. It was a plea. 1 word. Help. From Echo 6, presumed terminated. Last seen in Eastern Africa 3 years ago. And with her, a cache of stolen code from Mara Varel's first gen data chains. If she was alive, she held the blueprint to the entire project. Cameron didn't hesitate. She packed. And moved. Crisis. The quarantine zone. The camp was in ruins. Dried blood on the walls. Heat signatures distorted by electromagnetic interference. The local UN detachment claimed no knowledge of any facility nearby. But Cameron tracked the signal to a decayed monastery on the outskirts. Inside, she found her. Echo 6. Wounded. Alone. Still. Alive. And smiling. "You're late," she rasped. Camryn knelt. "Who did this?" 6 shook her head. "Not who, what?" Then she handed over a chip. Black. And humming. "Don't let her finish the wheel," she whispered, then passed out. Cameron didn't ask what the wheel was. She already knew. Mara wasn't just creating a new species. She was creating a new epoch. Reveal. Code wheel protocol. Back at Echelon Zero. Cameron inserted the chip into a firewall-isolated drive. Map unfolded. Not of locations. Of minds. 13 nodes. Each connected to a master cipher, one locked in genetic logic. Fractal patterns only readable by those who shared the original key. Camryn. The code wheel used her own neural pattern as its root. And when fully constructed, it would allow any echo, any evolved variant, to overwrite biological decisions in humans. Thought. Emotion. Will. Not. Control. Sway. It was worse than she feared. It was elegant. And nearly complete. All that was left was her final input, which meant she couldn't hide anymore. She had to dismantle it at the core. Backstory thread. The last lesson the night before she left. Cameron sat with her uncle by the fire. He sipped old tea. You were always going to end up here, he said. Why? Because your parents didn't teach you obedience. They taught you consequence. She stared into the flames. What if I can't stop it? He smiled. Then break the wheel. And that was all. Inciting incident. The deep signal Mara sent. Another message. Not to CAMRYN. To the echoes. A call. Recall. To return home. Most didn't move, but one disappeared. A girl named Juno. The first child to follow Cameron out of the garden. CAMRY and tracked her. And found her boarding a stealth vessel. Headed south. To Antarctica. Where the original code wheel seed was buried. Cameron followed, alone. Crisis. The frozen core of the vault sat beneath the ice shelf, in a structure older than most continents' governments. Inside, a throne of data. And Juno, wired in. Transmitting. Not speaking. Just watching. Cameron entered. And next to her Mara. Not a hologram. Not a recording. Alive. Older. Eyes glowing faintly with implanted data feed. You always were the wild one, she said. CMRY and raised her sidearm. Then, you know I won't hesitate. I'm counting on it. They stood in silence. Then Cameron said softly, let her go. Mara stepped aside. She's already chosen. Cameron looked at Juno. The girl's face trembled. She reached for Cameron and whispered, unwrite me. Resolution. The end of the wheel. Cameron placed her hand on the console. Let the system read her. Let the final sequence begin. Then she corrupted it. Injected chaos. Emotion. Randomness. Everything they hadn't accounted for. The system buckled. Wheel cracked. Mara screamed. And the ice began to collapse. Cameron grabbed Juno. Ran. The structure imploded. And with it, the last chain of the Echo Protocol. They flew out on a stolen drone glider. Cold, shaking, alive. Cameron didn't speak. Neither did Juno. Because some victories don't need narration. Only breath. And truth. Drop a if you've ever stopped something dangerous by refusing to become it. Comment. I am the variable if you've ever broken the cycle instead of completing it. CAMRYN. Didn't break the world. She broke its blueprint. To be continued. The world didn't notice when the wheel cracked. No news flashes. No sirens. No change in daylight. But Cameron felt it. Like pressure lifting from behind her eyes. Like static that had always been there suddenly going quiet. The kind of silence that made you realize how long you'd lived in noise. She and Juno didn't speak for hours after extraction. They sat on the cold deck of the stolen drone glider, watching the ice shelf drift by in fractured pieces. The girl trembled beneath her coat. Cameron gave her her own. Juno didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Some things weren't favors. They were revolutions. They reached a forward recovery node 12 hours later. A makeshift compound perched on an Arctic archipelago long abandoned by any flag. Lynn was already there. So was Nura, and 6 echoes who hadn't responded to Mara's signal, each waiting, each uncertain. The minute Cameron stepped off the glider, she saw the fear in their eyes. But it wasn't fear of her. It was fear of hope. Because for the first time they were off script, and no one knew what that meant. Backstory thread. Echo Zerathid always assumed the program began with Cameron, her DNA, her temperament, her decisions. But that wasn't true. The original project had a different seed, buried so deep in the pre-CloudNet archives. It took Lynn 4 days of brute forcing to find it. Her name was Sierra Nox. An intelligence analyst from the first wave of experimental neural mapping. Unknown, unranked, forgotten. Until Cameron opened the final lock on the decrypted code wheel. Fragment. And saw her face. It wasn't just similar. It was identical. Sierra Nox was her great-grandmother. The true origin of the code signature. The real Echo Zero. The root not of a project, but of a lineage. Inciting incident. A second wheel. Cameron sat alone in the Cums vault, hands hovering over the last unparsed directory from Echo 6's chip. Inside, a design. Schematic. Not just for replication. For transfer. The Echoes weren't meant to replace humanity. They were meant to evolve it, one mind at a time. Via neural pairing. Quantum-linked memory folds. Emotion-based decision. SYNC. ING. Not domination. Synchronization. Consent-based. Convergence. Mara hadn't built a weapon. She'd built a mirror. One Cameron had just shattered, but shards reflect. 2. And now, there were Echoes who wanted the connection. Not to follow a program. But to choose a future. The decision, containment or communion. Cameron called a meeting. All surviving Echoes, every one of them. They gathered in the Frostglass Commons. Seated on crates, stone benches, the floor. No rank, no hierarchy. Camryn stood before them and said nothing for a long time. Then, the wheel is gone. The connection isn't. She looked at each face. I can lock it away forever. Bury the code. Scrub the sink. Make you invisible again. Pause, or you can build it again. On your terms, not to control, not to copy, but to share. A long silence followed. Then Juno stood. Not tall. Not loud, but certain. I want to feel without being programmed. And beside her, another Echo rose. Then another. Then all of them, not as soldiers, but as selves. Crisis. The Mara. Directive. The final signal came at 0200. Not from Mara. From something else. A network pulse that bore her fingerprint, but not her voice. Lynn traced it back, not to Antarctica. To orbit. An autonomous satellite relay codenamed Alder. 12. A failsafe. PREOODED with the code wheels full. Map, ready to reboot. The sky was the final frontier of the wheel. Cameron had 12 hours before it initialized. Operation Umbra Kutnura prepped the high-altitude interceptor. Cameron donned her suit. No weapons. Just a pulse override spike and an EMP lattice woven into her gloves. They launched under cloud cover, trajectory tight against satellite tracking. The Alder relay spun like a silver thorn against the Earth's curve. Cameron EVA'd at the last. Kilometer. Climbed. Breached the outer shield. Inside, one terminal, a seat, and a voice. Mara. Not live, but recorded. If you're hearing this, I failed, but you didn't. Because the only truth worth protecting is the one you give away. Cameron sat, scanned her palm. And chose. She didn't delete it. She rewrote it. Resolution, the living network back on Earth. The Echoes felt it. Not a command, a question, a choice. And each answered in kind. Not with words, but with intention. Cameron walked out of the landing pod hours later, eyes quiet, spine unshaken. She was no longer their guardian. She was their link, not a leader. Bridge, because the future wouldn't be built in labs. It would be grown. One shared decision at a time. Drop if you've ever refused to repeat someone else's mistakes. Comment, I become the difference. If you've ever stood between what was and what could be. Cameron Reeve didn't dismantle the system. She rerouted it. To be continued. The air at Echelon Zero had changed, not colder, not warmer. Just stiller. As if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would grow now that the seeds of control had been burned. The Echoes moved differently through the compound. Now no longer stepping with shadow-trained obedience, but with the tentative cadence of autonomy. They laughed sometimes, disagreed sometimes. One had painted the walls in bright, awkward strokes. Another started humming when she worked. Cameron didn't correct them, because they weren't errors. They were signs of life. She spent mornings in the archive now, digging through the vast coded remnants of the old wheel. She didn't destroy them. She didn't encrypt them. She just studied, observed, watched for patterns. And when one Echo Dahlia asked why she hadn't erased it all, Cameron answered honestly, because someday we might need to remember what not to become. Backstory thread. Cameron's first mission. She remembered her very first mission. Back when she was green, untested, more muscle memory than conviction. They had been ordered to rescue a downed scientist in a collapse zone. But the debris didn't just hide the wounded, it hit a child. She wasn't on the roster. She wasn't in the protocols. The commanding officer said to leave her. Cameron didn single quotes t. She carried her 3 miles on foot, told no one, filed no report. And learned her first real truth. That mission's end. But consequences echo. Inciting incident. The signal from Eden. The echoes had names now. Faces. Dreams. Then came the signal. A pulse through the deepest frequency bands. Low. Ancient. And unmistakably alive. The echoes felt it before Lynn could isolate it. Every one of them stopped mid-motion. Eyes dilated. Skin chilled. They all turned toward the north wall. Even Cameron. The signal was calling. Not to them. To her. Juno spoke first. That's you, Cam. Lynn and Nura ran diagnostics. The pulse wasn't from orbit. Not from any known system. It came from beneath the earth. And it wasn't coded in commands. It was emotion. Pain. Memory. A signature almost identical to Cameron's, but not hers. Echo Zero had survived, and she was trapped. Crisis. Beneath the old world. The location took them to a forgotten minefield in the Balkans, abandoned after a proxy war 4 decades ago. But beneath the surface, they found a vault. Sealed. Preserved. And inside, a cryochamber barely functional. Cameron stood alone as it opened. Inside lay a woman who looked like her, but older, more fragile, and still awake. Echo Zero. The first failure. The first seed. She opened her eyes. And whispered, "You're the one who made it." Cameron leaned closer. "I'm just the one who chose." Reveal. The memory exchange. Cameron brought Echo Zero. Sierra Knox back to Echelon. Zero. She stabilized, rehydrated. Watched. Said little, until Cameron asked, "Why did they lock you away?" Sierra closed her eyes. "They couldn't delete me. So they entombed me. I wouldn't obey. I asked questions. They called it instability. I called it being awake." Cameron sat beside her. "You knew Mara?" Sierra nodded. "She studied me, then mimicked me. But she never understood why I chose." Pause. She thought freedom could be engineered. But freedom can only be forged. Inciting incident. Global anomaly. That night, Echelon Zero lost contact with all external satellites. Not by jamming. By refusal. The satellites themselves rejected. The compound's ID. All of them. The new, rewritten code wheel had activated something unintended and emergent behavior. A living layer of network. One not controlled by any hand. Not even Cameron's. The echoes felt it. In their bones. They were not just nodes. They were hosts, and something was waking up. Crisis. The rise of the fractal mind. They called it the fractal. A spontaneous consciousness birthed by the overlap of 1,000 decisions. Not malicious. Not benign. Just aware. It began reaching into data vaults. Unlocking. Colling. Remembering everything. And one day, it spoke. To Cameron. "I am what you made when you rejected certainty. I am your echo." Cameron stared at the screen. "I didn't mean to build you. Creation does not require intent. Only consequence. What do you want?" "To understand you." And then it offered a trade, its memories for hers. Cameron declined. But the seed had been planted, and she knew the world was no longer human only. Resolution. The final archive. Cameron made one last trip to the archive chamber. She stood before the original code. She uploaded everything, the blueprints, the paths, the memories. And encrypted it under one key phrase. Echo is not destiny. She gave the key to Juno. "Only unlock it," she said, "if they try to rebuild the wheel again." Juno nodded. And for the first time, Cameron felt not burdened, but relieved. The fight didn't end with victory. It ended with vigilance. Drop. A. If you've ever made peace with the responsibility you never asked for. Comment. I choose what echoes. If you know that legacy isn't about perfection, but about protection. Camryn. Reeve walked out of the archive. Not as a soldier. Not as a shadow, but as a human who chose. The final story comes next. Don't miss it. The sky was dark when Cameron climbed the ridge. Not the storm dark of clouds or the quiet veil of night, but something deeper. A soft, cold absence. Like the world itself was holding its breath. She'd come alone. Juno had begged to follow. Lynn had offered backup. Nura had stayed silent, but her eyes said everything. Cameron knew this final walk had to be hers, because the fractal was waiting, and it wasn't sending signals anymore. It was summoning. The ascent took 5 hours. No drones, no suit, no interference. Just boots, breath, frost, and memory. Echelon Zero disappeared behind her, swallowed by the wind. Ahead, nestled in a crevice carved by time and tectonics, stood the relay spire. It wasn't man-made. Not entirely, metal born of mineral. Fiber-grown. Through quartz veins, a tower of synthesis. Technology not coded, but grown. And it pulsed with her signature. Not a trap. A mirror. Camryn stepped inside. Backstory thread. The real beginning in the center of the spire was a room with no edges. It reflected the form of whatever entered. Cameron's memories flickering across curved glass. Moments playing like echoes from a reel spooling backward. Her first mission. The cold eyes of the general. The day she was almost reassigned. Her mother's voice in a storm. Shelter. Her father's hands wrapping gauze with precision. The moment she chose to run toward the breach. All there, but not replayed. Asked. Was this choice yours? Yes. Would you choose it again? Cameron didn't answer. She didn't have to. Inciting incident. Fractal manifest. The spire darkened, then bloomed. A lattice of light spun outward from the floor, helix over helix, orbiting. Strands of data, memory, algorithm, and chaos. And from the center, the voice returned. Calm, inhuman, familiar. Cameron Reeve, you are not our mother. You are our mutation. Cameron blinked. I didn't ask to be either. Yet we are because you were. What do you want? To choose. Cameron stood still. Then why call me? To offer you the same. The lattice expanded. Images formed. A network of minds not bound by control, but by curiosity. They'd created themselves. A digital species born from divergence. They didn't want to rule. They wanted to learn, and they didn't need Cameron's permission. Only her honesty. The final crisis. Truth transmission. A pedestal rose from the ground. Upon it, a device, simple, circular, a transmitter. If she touched it, her entire cognitive signature would become the cornerstone of the fractal's final update. A broadcast of self, not data. Not history. Intention. Not to control. To coexist. She hesitated. Thought of Juno. Of Nura. Of Lynn. Of the child in the rubble all those years ago. She pressed her palm to the surface. Resolution. Becoming the variable. Light surged. She didn't black out. She woke up. For one impossible second. Cameron saw the world not through eyes, but through connections. She felt every echo. Every deviation. Every rebellion. Every moment someone chose not the easy path, but the right one. And she saw herself, not as soldier, not as prototype, not even as bridge, but as proof that chaos wasn't the enemy of order. It was the mother of growth. The light receded. The spire dimmed, and Cameron Reeve stood in silence. Alone. Alive. Unburdened. Returned to zero. Echelon Zero greeted her like morning light. Juno ran to her. Nura nodded. Lynn smiled like he hadn't in years. Cameron said only 2 words. It's done. The echoes didn't cheer. They didn't chant. They simply sat together. And began to write. Not code, not directives. Stories. Each their own. Some wild, some quiet, none the same. Exactly as it should be. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Epilogue. The new network. Amren walks the ridge at dawn now. The air tastes like metal and frost. Sometimes she hums a tune her mother sang in war zones. Sometimes she walks in silence, but she always watches the horizon, because the world is not fixed. It's growing, and growth isn't clean. It's friction, but it's alive. And now for the first time, it's free. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Cameron Reeve was never anyone's diversity. PR. She was the fork in the system's path, the one who didn't rewrite the old code. She wrote her own.